welcome to Money Talks with Attorney Coral. I am Attorney Coral Plez, the host of the show, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this morning. I always like to mention that the show is sponsored by Columbia Savings and Loan Association. And I just want to say to the audience, everybody listening, don't sleep on Columbia, okay? Do not sleep on Columbia Savings and Loan Association. Columbia is behind a campaign to get people into homes, 100 homes by the 100th campaign. We've been talking about that for the past few weeks. And in fact, last week we had the vice president of the bank on, a gentleman by the name of Wes McKenzie, and he was talking about this initiative that the bank has launched to try to get people into home ownership. So please reach out to Columbia Savings and Loan at 414-374-0486 if you may be interested in applying for a loan to buy your own home. They are there to support you. So today I'm going to shift gears and go back and talk a little bit about estate planning again. I'm always saying that estate planning relates to the theme of the show, the Money Talks, is because if you do the proper estate planning, it can save money. It may cost you some money to put the proper estate plan in place, but the overall goal is to save money, to protect your assets so that you're able to pass things on to the next generation. So that's the name of the game in terms of estate planning. And so that's a broad general topic that I've put out there, and we've talked about it on a few different shows now. So let's say, for instance, there was one time that we talked about guardianships. There's been a couple of shows that we've done about the importance of planning or having a will. And we've also talked on a prior show about the importance or significance of having a power of attorney and how important these documents are. So every time I circle back to these topics, I want to bring up a different element of it just for sake of discussion. So that's something that I just want to be clear about. Today's discussion, as well as any of the others that we've done that talks about estate planning, have been informational. I'm just trying to put information out for the community. I'm encouraging people to call in if they have something to add to the discussion, different information that the audience, the listening audience, may have that they want to call in and talk about. So this is about educating. This isn't lawyering, right? So I'm not able to give out legal advice that is particular to your situation. I know it's tempting for people to call in and they don't maybe even realize that they're doing it, but they'll call in and start asking for legal advice. This isn't the forum for that. If there's an opportunity to just give information, that's what this is all about, okay? If you need legal help, I will be giving out the phone number for my law firm at some point, or if you have an attorney of your own, we may say something to you today that may spark you to call your attorney and have a meeting with them so that you can get legal advice. But this won't be the forum for that, not today. But generally, we are going to talk about estate planning, and specifically, we're going to talk about how to protect your home and your assets if you have to go into a nursing home. So that's the topic that I would like to touch base a little bit on today. So right away, I'll go ahead and give out the number here to the station if there's anyone who has a question or a comment about this particular topic, if you've experienced it, or if you have any friends or family that have had these types of experiences, please give us a call and just share what you may know. The number here is 414-444-5250. That is 414-444-5250. Okay. So I'm going to start out the show today with a couple of questions. And I'm going to open these questions up either to the listening audience, or I'm going to ask the gentleman in the studio with me this morning to chime in if you know the answer to any of these questions, right? So nothing difficult. Jermaine, and I've got young Carvey, and then another gentleman that I met last week in the corner. Yeah, your name again? Nate. Okay. So here's my question for you guys. I'm going to throw this out there. Does anyone know what is the average life expectancy in the United States for black males? What's the average age that a black man lives to be in the United States? You just give me your best guess.
I want to say 70.
Okay. That's a good guess. That's a
Mhm.
good guess. What do you think, Nate?
I'm gonna say 67.5.
Okay,
67.5.
okay.
You sounding awfully precise over there, Nate.
Yeah, he was, man. He was to the point.
Yeah, yeah. So, different charts vary. But the most recent one that I was able to pull up said that it was 69 years.
Wow.
So you both were so close. Um, and maybe different actuarial tables may have a different age, but it's roughly 69 years. You said 70. Nate said 67.5. That point five, that's I think that's pretty good. Okay, so yeah, we're talking about 69 years is the average. That's the average, right? Life expectancy for a black male. So one more question for you then. What is the average life expectancy in the United States for black females? What do you think that might be?
I think they live a little longer than black males. So I would say about 77,
Okay.
80 years old at the most.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, with the research that I did,
yeah,
it was actually 74.6 years.
yeah,
So you were absolutely right when you said that the black females tend to live a little
yeah,
longer than the black males.
yeah,
So not quite 80 as the average life expectancy, but I think you said about 77.
yeah,
So 74.6. So just about 75 years.
yeah.
That's what we're talking about, just on averages. Yeah. Okay, so somebody else says 76. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so right around in that area. Now, the life expectancy for Caucasian people is a little bit higher in on average, right?
Right.
But and Hispanic people too, on average. I saw that in the research, as well as Asian people, I think had the highest of all. But right now we're talking about issues that affect the black community. So I'm focusing on the numbers that relate to us.
Yeah,
Okay. I am blessed to have longevity in my family. How
yeah.
about you guys?
Oh yeah, I got longevity in my family. My dad is when he just turned 74, 75, something like that.
Wow. Okay.
Um,
So
so
he's already beat the life
yeah,
expectancy, the average anyway.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So longevity runs right, deep in my family.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Right. What about you, Nate?
So longevity does run deep in my family, with the exception of my mother, who unfortunately got colon cancer, and she didn't survive it. But my father, I expect him to live till 80 plus. Uh, my grandparents actually on my mom's side, they just died, but they were 90,
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I expect that to be the story for my family. So
yeah.
Right.
Nice, nice. Yeah,
Yeah, and those are some nice numbers. Those are
yeah.
ripe old ages. I can tell you that my dad had a sister who was 98 when she died, and that was a little over a year ago. My godmother was almost 96 when she died,
Mm,
and I have two aunties now that are still alive
yeah.
that are in their 90s. One of them is about 96 and the other
Mm,
one is younger in her 90s. But I love to brag that my mom is 91 years old,
awesome. That's
and
awesome.
she is very able-bodied, enjoys her life, enjoys her kids, enjoys, well, most times she enjoys her kids, right? But she get a little bit upset with us from time to time, probably me in particular, because I have the most mouth out of everybody, but that's a whole other topic.
Mm,
I'm bringing it up because this relates to the topic of nursing home care, right? um Someone in my mother's position, she's very fortunate right now that she's able bodied enough to take care of herself, handle her own personal care needs on a day to day basis. Even though I take care of her overall, I do the shopping for her, I do the cooking for her, I make sure she gets her medical appointments. But in terms of day to day living, she can get up, she can get dressed, she can cook her meals, she can walk around her home, she can watch her favorite TV shows, and she can live her life. But sometimes things happen that a person becomes incapacitated
Yeah.
to the point where they can't take care of their activities of daily living, all on their own, and they need some help. And sometimes it's extreme enough where people end up having to go into a nursing home. So these are kind of heavy topics that I bring up. And I'm always saying that I'm the one that comes in and talks about all these things that people really don't even want to think about, let alone spend an hour talking about. But it's so important that we do, because if we talk about these things and we educate ourselves about these things, we can take proactive steps to
Yeah.
protect ourselves if we do have to go into a nursing home. And it happens with some people.
Yeah, yeah. Knowledge is power, and just putting it out there so people know options and have those things. It'll help the transition be much smoother.
Right,
Yeah,
right. I agree.
yeah,
And sometimes illness can strike out of nowhere.
yeah,
We don't like to think about this stuff. Again, I keep saying that, but um, we probably all at least know of, whether it's knowing someone personally or just hearing of a situation where somebody, maybe as young as in their 50s or even in their 60s, maybe will have a stroke, or something to that effect, to where they become debilitated and cannot take care of themselves.
yeah. I actually have a friend. See, I'm 47, so he's about 46, but out of nowhere, aneurysm had bust in his head. He was getting in the shower, and aneurysm both, burst in his head, but they was able to save him. But now he's in a rehab center and he's rehabbing. So this was something that was unexpected.
Wow. And he's about your age?
Yeah, he's about 46, 47.
So now that is terribly
See
young.
what I'm saying? So it was just out of nowhere, and just even though with my situation is out of nowhere that I was diagnosed with prostate cancer.
Oh,
So
I didn't
I
know
was
that.
man, I was able to catch it in time. It was at stage 2, and I had no clue. But me going in and having ankle surgery, they was able to find that.
Isn't that
So
something?
I'm like, listen, this is crazy. Life and unexpected things happen. So when things happen, you have to be prepared.
Right.
So now I'm just on a whole totally different journey of, the things that you're talking about is helpful,
Right.
even in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate that. And that's what we want to do, share information.
Yeah.
I was thinking about recently, I know I always relate these things to celebrities, but sometimes when people know of the celebrities going through everyday life crises like everybody else does, it
Yeah.
makes you stop and really pay attention.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how old the comedian Sinbad is.
Yeah. I saw that.
If anybody knows, or if anyone listening knows how old Sinbad is, give us a call and just educate us about that. But Sinbad had a very massive stroke within
Yeah.
the last couple of years,
Yeah.
and now I think he is still wheelchair bound, that
Yes.
he's not able to walk.
Yeah.
But I saw pictures of him in public recently, and you can tell, you can see the loss of muscle mass because he was
Yeah.
such a big, tall, strong guy.
Yeah.
You could see that. And now you can kind of see where one side of his face is a little different from the other side.
Mm.
You can tell that sometimes when strokes happen, that's what it does. It'll take one side of your body in a different direction, that you can't move it or function with it as you typically could have. And I don't know how old Sinbad is, but I know he's not very elderly.
Right.
Maybe he's in his late 60s, maybe he's 70, but still, that's in the grand scheme of things. That may beat the average life expectancy for a black male, but we all sat here and just talked about relatives and people that
Yeah.
we know that are living strong into their 90s.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal if a person has to go into a nursing home. And so you stop and you think, right, that if you have to go into a nursing home because you're not able to care for yourself, and a lot of people think, well, that's why I had kids. Let my kids take care of me.
Mm.
But yeah, Nate's laughing.
Baby boomer philosophy.
Yeah, maybe so. We're gonna put that on the baby boomers. Hey, I'm Gen X, so you can talk about the boomers all you want.
Right.
I shouldn't say that because we probably have boomers listening. We respect the boomers. Trust me. The you echo boomers wouldn't be around if it weren't for them. So we gotta
That's
give
true.
respect to the boomers, right? Um, but the thing that people have to consider is your children have jobs, right? They have families. Um, and as a parent, you don't want to be a burden on your child if you don't need to be. Um, and maybe that's a harsh way to say it, but I'm just cutting right to the facts right now that if you have an elderly parent that is not able, or even if they're not elderly, if they're just incapacitated in some way, but you still have a job that you have to do, you still have kids that you're raising, um, that person may need to go into a nursing home. So that's where this conversation, where we're leading off with this conversation, I want to talk about a couple of scenarios. Now, I made these scenarios up. These aren't real people that I'm about to give an example of. This is something that I just kind of came up with to illustrate a point, right? So let's talk about this a little bit. Let's say there's two scenarios. These are two married couples, okay? And they're all the same age for purposes of my example. Um, these two couples, I've got George and Ruth, and I've got James and Addie, right? Married couples. They're neighbors and they live on the same block. Each couple has their own home. Their own homes are valued at $300,000. And these were people that worked hard all of their lives and they have paid their homes off. Their homes are free and clear, right? They own them outright. The other thing that these two couples have done alike is each of them has a savings of $400,000. So they're figuring, okay, we've saved well in our lives, we've worked hard, we've paid off our home. They each have a couple of kids, but their kids are adults now. They're out, they're living on their own. So they're figuring, okay, we've done the responsible thing. Now, focusing on George and Ruth. Now, set James and Addie aside. George and Ruth kept all of their assets in their names. Um, their home, their savings account, everything that they've worked hard for is in their names. George got sick at the age of 78 years old and he had to go into a nursing home. Ruth was still okay, so she stayed in their family home. George lived for 3 more years in the nursing home, and the nursing home cost was $7,000 a month. So I did some rough math, and I'm just rounding figures, um, because this is not an exact figure. If anybody's going to do the math and check me, I know that it's a couple grand off. Um, $250,000 of nursing home costs. Now, when we come back from our break, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little more detail and a little bit why this is important, as I'm going to compare what George and Ruth did to what James and Addie did when we come back from the break. Okay. Thank you so much. And don't forget to call in when we come back at 414-444-5250 to add to our discussion today about protecting your assets if you have to go into a nursing home. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome back. This is Money Talks with Attorney Coral. When we were on the break, we had an opportunity to do a little research to circle back to talk about Sinbad. And apparently, Sinbad is now only 67 years old. And this massive stroke that he had happened in 2020. So that was 4 years ago. Is that right, Jermaine?
Yeah, 4 years ago, 2020, he had the stroke. Yeah,
Yeah. And I think for with what you were looking at, he was not able to walk for the first 2 years.
yeah. He had a stroke and he was wheelchair bound for 2 years. So he just learned how to walk. But 2022.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
he's struggling to get that strength back. And I think
yeah,
that's why I was saying you can look at him and the loss of muscle mass is very apparent. Um, I noticed recently in the news that there were a number of comedians that got together to perform in order to raise money to help him.
yeah,
So I know it was Kevin Hart, Tiffany Haddish, gosh, there were like several of them, and now I can't even think of who all it was. It was definitely those two, but there were several other that were. I think Dave Chappelle.
yeah,
How could I forget?
yeah.
If I'm talking
Dave
about the
Chappelle.
goat, right? Dave
Yeah,
Chappelle was one of them too. But it's good that they're doing these things, but it just goes to show Sinbad had a very successful career and did well for himself and his family. We were talking about, we got, youngsters here in the studio that they said, oh, it was a comedian before our time. So that's so funny to me because you and I were sitting here saying, no, he was on a different world. Like
yeah,
we remember that.
yeah,
And so he did well for himself. And yet at a relatively young age, of what would he have been 63 years
yeah,
old when this happened
yeah,
to him, and now it's a good thing that these other people are kind of backing him up to try to help raise money for his continued care.
yeah, yeah. Having a stroke is massive. It takes effect on your body and takes away certain abilities. But then your body is used to. So just to send him in that condition shows me that it can happen to anybody. It don't matter your life status
Right.
and any of that.
Right.
No one is exempt.
Right. No, absolutely, absolutely the case, which is why we're talking about these issues today. So, for instance, with my imaginary couples that I was talking about before we went on break, let me go back and just refresh in case people missed the first part of this. So, this is just examples, right, to illustrate the point of the importance of what we're talking about today. So I've got these two couples that I just made up. These are not real people. There's George and Ruth, and there's James and Addie. They are neighbors on the same block. Each one owns their own home worth about $300,000. Homes are free and clear. These people worked hard their whole life. They've paid off their homes. They each have a savings account of $400,000. Um, George and Ruth kept everything in their name. So their home is in their name, their savings is in their name. We're just focusing on, just for sake of generalization, so I can give an example. We're just talking about these two particular assets, right? Okay, so in my example, George got sick at 78 years old and he had to go into a nursing home. Ruth was fine, and so she stayed behind in their family home that they worked hard to pay for. They've got two adult children out on their own. James and Addie have two adult children that are out on their own. Okay. In my scenario, George lived 3 years in the nursing home, and that nursing home cost was $7,000 a month. So, for 3 years of time in the nursing home, that is approximately, I'm rounding the figures, approximately $250,000 that had to be spent on George's care. Well, um, it wasn't a problem for them, right? They had $400,000 in savings. So they paid for George's nursing home care out of pocket every month at $7,000 a month for the 3 years that he lived there. So they took their $400,000 account and paid $250,000 out of it, right? So Ruth ended up eventually going into a nursing home as well. She didn't go in until she was 82 years old, but she stayed there for 5 years. She lived 5 more years in the nursing home. By the time she went to a nursing home, the cost of the nursing home was $8,000 a month. So it cost more when she went than it did when George was there. So again, they had to spend down their savings to pay for George's nursing home care. Therefore, there was only about $150,000 left for Ruth. Well, Ruth stayed 5 years in a nursing home that cost $8,000 a month. Multiply that out, we have roughly $480,000 that it costs for Ruth to be in the nursing home. Well, how are you going to make that math work, right? Because she only had $150,000 left in her savings to pay for $480,000 worth of care. So, what ended up happening again in my hypothetical example, just to illustrate the point, um, Ruth was able to pay for the first approximately 18 months from her savings. After that, the savings was depleted. She didn't have any more cash on hand after that. So, once she spent down that last $150,000, she became eligible for long term care through Medicaid, right? And Medicaid, I'll talk a little bit about it, but Medicaid is basically a joint federal and state program that provides health coverage, including long term care, to people who qualify. And we'll talk a little bit more in a moment about how you can qualify for Medicaid. And we're going to talk about this, let me just say, in general terms, right? Because there's a lot of little differences in each person's case that make a difference in terms of eligibility and what you qualify for. But we're going to talk about it just in broad general terms. Um, the federal laws set forth the broad requirements for Medicaid mandates, but some of the particulars of how the programs get applied can vary from state to state. Okay. So in this case, we're talking about Ruth, who was able to spend down that $150,000 that was left in her savings at $8,000 a month. So after about 18 months, she spent down all of her money. Um, and there was a need then for her to qualify for Medicaid in order to continue to pay for that nursing home care because she lived for 5 years, not just 18 months. So that way it was paid for every month through the Medicaid long term care. Well, all right, you think they worked hard, they had their savings, they spent it on their care when they needed it. And then after that, the state kicked in or Medicaid kicked in and was able to pay for what she needed. Ruth passed away, and the two kids, the two adult children that she and George had, think that their parents left them a home that was free and clear. Because remember, I said they had a $300,000 home that they worked hard for all of their lives, and it was paid in full. Well, not so fast. They opened up a probate estate so that they could transfer the ownership of that home to themselves, the two adult children, because that was their parents' home. And they thought, all right, they left us a house. Well, what ended up happening is the Medicaid estate recovery program came along and put a lien against the estate for the $330,000 that it ended up paying out for Ruth's nursing home expense. Well, if you've got a lien against the estate for $330,000, and let's just say the only valuable asset of the estate was the home, which was only worth $300,000, you do that math, you're at a negative $30,000, right? So basically, the home is forfeited at that point. Um, the home has to be sold, and the estate Medicaid estate recovery program has to be paid at least $300,000 because they were owed $330,000. And in that example, their two adult children were left with nothing. All right. So I want to compare and contrast this with James and Addie. because James and Addie are going to do things a little bit differently and have a much different outcome. I'm just illustrating the point of how important these estate planning matters can be. All right. I said these couples were all the same age. They lived on the same block. They had homes valued at the same amount, which was $300,000. They each had savings in the amount of $400,000. They each had two adult children that were out and about on their own. The difference with James and Addie is that James and Addie took timely, correct legal actions when they were 70 years old. Okay? Because they saw a family member have a situation where they didn't take legal precautions or put a legal plan in place, and they saw some other relative that basically lost everything, like George and Ruth did in their example. So when they were both 70 years old, they decided to meet with their attorney and do some estate planning. And what they did was they created a proper family trust. Okay. There's different types of trusts. And eventually we'll maybe do a show that talks more about trusts. It's a little more complicated than I want to get into right now. But let's just say, for sake of discussion, that generally the two main types are revocable trusts and irrevocable trusts. And the main difference between the two is that if you transfer your assets to a revocable trust, you still maintain control and access to whatever those assets are that you put in your revocable trust. An irrevocable trust, there are certain restrictions. They're not necessarily 100% absolute, um, because there's a way to get at assets if you need to, if it's drawn a certain way. It's the easiest way that I can say it. But generally, in an irrevocable trust, you are transferring those assets to an entity that you create in order to protect those assets, get those assets out of your name so that if a situation happens like it did with George and Ruth, if James or Addie ends up having to go into a nursing home, they did some planning in advance that allowed them to protect their assets. So let's say same situation happens. James gets to the age of 78, he ends up having to go into a nursing home. Well, right away, he's able to qualify for Medicaid because he doesn't have these assets that have to be spent down before he can qualify. The assets are already gone and transferred out of his name. He spends 3 years in a nursing home and he passed away. Medicaid covered and paid for his stay. Addie goes in. Oh, Nate, you have a question?
So he was able.
Just want some clarity. He was able to qualify for the Medicaid and, pass away with his legacy basically because of the revocable trust. That's true.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That's
Yep.
cool.
Yep. And that's what happened here. And the same thing with his wife, Addie. Again, these are my hypothetical people. I keep saying that because there might be people out there with these names. I'm not talking about anybody. I sat up last night and made this up, right? Just so I could illustrate the point today. But Addie was 82. She went into the nursing home. She stayed there for 5 years. Her cost too was higher because it came a little bit later because these costs go up and up, every year. Even that figure for a nursing home, I was going to ask if anybody wants to call in and tell us what the current, maybe somebody knows what the current rate is for monthly nursing home care, just on average in Wisconsin. I did a little research and came up with some figures, but I'd like to see if there's anybody that would, like to call in and talk to us about that. If you know, the number is 414-444-5250 if you want to call in with that. But back to James and Addie. So Addie went in and to nursing home. She qualified right away too, and the family was able to keep the home and the savings after they lost their mother and father in this situation. So, um, yeah, my research with respect to the costs of nursing homes was anywhere between $6,000 to $12,000 a month on average. Um, And here's the thing. I mean, there's schools of thoughts about everything, right? Some people may say, you know what? I don't care. I will spend my money. That's why I worked hard for it all my life. I didn't work hard all my life to in order to leave, hundreds of thousands of dollars to my kids. So if I'm elderly now and if I need nursing home care, I want to pay for it because I want to get the best care that my money can buy. That is a valid choice if that's the choice that you would like to make. You're not obligated to protect money and in order to leave assets to other people. But as long as it's an informed decision, I think any decision, if it is an informed decision, that's your decision that you have the right to make. Okay. All right. So shifting gears a little bit here, because I've been talking about what are the rules when you are attempting to qualify for long-term care through Medicaid. Now, I'm going to speak in very general terms about these rules because it's a little bit of a complicated process. I mean, typically what you'll do is you'll sit down, maybe with a caseworker from Milwaukee County. These people that are very skilled and expert at calculating these figures, and they've got the software and everything they need, and every bit of income or assets or whatnot, tax returns, properties you own, anything that they may ask you to bring in so that they can evaluate and help you make these calculations. There's so much that goes into that we really couldn't do it justice today to really talk about everything that gets to be looked at. So I just thought we'll take some broad strokes and just look at general rules that are considered when you are attempting to qualify for long-term care through Medicaid. So the first rule is called the asset rule, right? So they're going to evaluate what are your assets. Well, there are certain assets that are exempt, such as your car or prepaid funeral or even your home that you live in. Well, and maybe that's not even a fair statement because that home is exempt as long as you're alive, right? We saw that with um, George and Ruth. Their home was exempt right up until the time Ruth passed away, and then Wisconsin Medicaid came and put their own lien against it. So I guess from what I've read, because I did a little research, why is it like that? Like, why do they have the rule that way? Well, I guess the thought is that if you're in a nursing home, if there's any chance that you might get better and be able to be back out on your own, they do not want it would be contrary to public policy to have taken your home away from you. So that asset is left untouched, but they're tallying it up on the backside so they can come for it later if that's what they end up having to do, right? And I've seen that in my practice where um, someone qualifies and they're receiving Medicaid long term care through the Medicaid program, and then they pass away, and we're thinking, okay, well, they left this home, we're going to transfer it to the kids. Not so fast, because here comes Medicaid with their lien, and we have to honor that. You can't close the estate without it. You've got to honor that. And they either can come up with the money to pay that claim or they have to sell the property to pay it, but it has to get paid either way. But okay, so asset rules, exempt assets, talked about the home to the extent that it's exempt. It kind of is, but not really. The car, prepaid funerals, but everything else is pretty much countable resources. So if you have investments, if you have IRAs, annuities, if you have real estate other than your home where you live, if you own an LLC or some sort of business, these are um, assets that have to be taken into consideration when you are attempting to qualify for Medicaid long term care. If you are a single person, the limit to the resources that you can have is $2,000. So, in other words, if you're a single person and you have, I don't know, I'll make up a figure. If you've got $6,000 in your savings account, you've got to spend that down. That first $4,000 has to be spent before you qualify for Medicaid long term care. In the example that we gave about Ruth, Ruth had to spend down that $150,000 savings that was left after her husband was taken care of for 3 years. So, whatever assets you have, if you're a single person, have to be spent down to the $2,000 mark. Anything above that will either disqualify you, or you've got to spend it and I don't mean spend it on whatever you want to go spend it on. You got to spend it on your long-term care, right? That's how it gets spent down. So you can't take a weekend in Vegas and blow the money. You've got to, put it towards your care. Now, if you're a couple, the married limit, um, if you go into, let's say, if you go into a nursing home together, which that can happen, maybe doesn't always happen, probably isn't the most likely way that it happens, but the limit then gets bumped up to 3,000. So again, you've got to spend everything but $3,000. Everything else is subject to um, the Medicaid provisions. So it looks like we have a caller. I'm going to ask the caller to please go ahead with your question or your comment about today's discussion. Go ahead, caller.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Cora. Tyrone W. speaking. Good morning, everybody in the studio. Good morning, Milwaukee.
Good morning, Terrell.
Yes, good morning. It sounds very predatory to me. Uh, with today's living wages and everything, and even with the average college student with the college debt and everything, I don't see how any way they can make way for their aging there. Excuse me. It just appears to me that there's no way out of the bag. I believe that you work all these years on these wages they give you, and Social Security they don't want to have give you that. Then Medicaid, Medicare, well, they act like they don't want to give you, so they don't want to give you nothing you don't work for. But then if you done went to college and everything, and you're trying to pay off college debt and everything, I mean, as far as the end of your life there, well, the interest done sucked up everything you got. So I ain't got nothing. So it seems like a very difficult way out of this bag that they've this barrel of boiling water they got us over, to where they don't want to pay us nothing, but they want to confiscate everything we got, almost like the sharecroppers or the Greenwood after Pine, Tulsa, Oklahoma situation. Don't want you to have nothing, but we don't want to pay you nothing. It's very difficult. I mean, how can it's almost like from from the womb to the tomb. You ain't entitled to nothing but just being born, breathe what you can, and then when you're dead, you're dead. That's it. So I don't know. It's very difficult. It's very difficult hearing what I'm hearing because it sounds very predatory on the nursing homes as well as the city and the state there when they want to forfeit or confiscate somebody's property and stuff there when they don't want to pay nobody nothing, but they want to take everything. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, Tyrone. I appreciate your comments. I wish I had the answers, right? I mean, it's more of a statement, I guess, than a question. That you said it sounds predatory. I certainly don't disagree. So that's why I guess the notion of estate planning, to the extent that this can help us to avoid some of these things from happening, that's why we're trying to get the word out. Maybe that's and again, people have the right to say I can work, save my money, and then when I'm in need and I need to go into a nursing home, that's what I worked hard for. Then I can spend my money to make sure I'm cared for. That's a valid choice, but just let it be an informed choice. We just want people to have information to know because Tyrone's point is very, very well taken in a situation like this. So thank you so much for calling in with that comment, Tyrone. So we were talking about how the married couple limit, $3,000 is the threshold. If there's anything more than that, then you're not going to qualify for Medicaid, or you spend it down for the purposes of your care, and then you qualify for Medicaid. Um, and so before we go to break, I'll point out one more thing here, that a very common scenario is when you have one spouse that goes into nursing care and the other spouse that doesn't yet need to go. That was the first example that I gave with George and Ruth. The spouse that stays at home is referred to in the regulations as a community spouse. The other spouse is referred to as the institutionalized spouse. I don't like that word in this context. That sounds a little bit harsh, but that's how it's stated. So, what do you need to do to spin down to qualify? If you've got that situation, we talked real general with the example that I gave, but those rules are um, complicated when you're looking at trying to prevent spousal impoverishment. That's what the law refers to it as when one spouse is institutionalized. So that's the sort of thing you deal with on a case by case basis with the case manager that's reviewing your case and looking at your assets and your income. So we're going to talk a little bit more when we come back from the break about income rules and countable resources and all that sort of thing. If you'd like to join the discussion, please give us a call at 414-444-5250. More on this topic when we come back from the break. Thank you for being with us. To Money Talks with Attorney Coral. We are late in the hour, so I see we have a caller holding. I'm going to go straight to the caller. Caller, please go ahead.
Yes, good morning. Uh, my question is in regard to, is there any timeline that's in place for when you must have that trust that you referred to set up, that is prior to the need?
That is an excellent question. And it's actually one of the things that I was going to talk about in this last segment. Um, the Medicaid program has, we call it a 5 year look back period that relates to transfers in order to determine a person's eligibility for the Medicaid program. So if you've transferred assets to whether it's a trust or whether it's to a person, if you've done that within a 5 year window of time from when you are applying for the Medicaid, you got to be careful because they can look at that and say, nope, this is still, we're going to look at these assets, and we're not going to let you basically divest those assets in order just to qualify for Medicare or Medicaid is what we've been talking about today. So that's an excellent question. 5 year look back period.
I see. I see. I have one follow up, and maybe this one is in regard to: are there any assets that are in the trust that are still at risk?
Well, it depends on the type of trust that you create. A basic revocable trust, you may have assets that are still at risk because it's considered that if it is a revocable trust, that you still exercise a level of power and control over those particular assets. So that's a broad general answer to your question.
Uh-huh.
But what I would recommend is that you would meet with, if you have a revocable trust and you're concerned about assets being able to be touched, then you might want to meet with your attorney who drew that agreement for you, or whichever attorney that you're working with, and have them go over that document to see whether or not there's assets that are exposed.
I see. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You are so welcome. Thank you so much for calling in today and have a great day.
All right, yourself.
Yes, go ahead, Nate.
So, of the people who are of elderly age 55 and up that go, or just elders, what percentage of those people go into nursing homes? Because what your job is as a youth is to protect your youth, so you won't have to enroll in a nursing home or, go into one in the first place. So, what's the percentage?
Yeah, I wish I knew. That's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that question. I know a lot of things, but I don't know the answer to that. So, yeah, what percentage of people go into nursing homes? We can make that a research project. Maybe there's something on Google. Google, you can learn almost anything, right, with Google. So, yeah, yeah. Well, if you get a minute, go ahead. If you find anything out before we close the show out today, let us know. I don't know what the percentages are. We just know that it's real on the day to day, as we live. Um, but I disagree that we should put that burden on the youth, though. Appreciate that you are strong youth and you're stepping up, saying, "Hey, we got to, protect our seniors." But seniors have an obligation too to protect themselves, and to try to leave something for the youth if that's what they choose to do. They don't have to. I think I've said that a few times during the show today, but it's a bottom down, top up type of thing that everybody has to do their part. We don't have the right to put that burden on our children, in my opinion. Right? That's my opinion. Um, I'm not a senior yet, but gonna put my 2 cents out there. Yeah. So that's why I love the question, that the caller had, because that was so relevant to what we're talking about. And it's a good segue into the final comments that I, want to make about all of this. Some people will say, well, can I just put the properties in my kids' names? Why do I have to think about this trust? Why do I have to do this or that? Why can't I just put, properties or savings accounts or whatever the case may be in my kids' names? Well, you can, right? But that may or may not be a good thing depending upon your kids. Maybe you have a kid who, and I'm talking about an adult child, right? So if you're 60 and your son is 25 and you say, I'm going to put this in their name, kind of like when we were talking about Wendy Williams a few weeks back, and Wendy Williams was having some struggles, gave power of attorney to her son who was 18, and he was party central. He was feeding everybody at the dorm. They were doing, Uber Eats for $100,000 and, partying her money until her bank said, whoa, look at these transactions. that are coming out of this account. And it was her bank that actually petitioned the court for guardianship over her in order to take away his rights as power of attorney, because they felt that he was recklessly spending her money because he was just young. He's a spoiled, rich, young kid who's in college. So he may be, an upstanding young gentleman, but he wasn't handling the money right, according to the court. Because they made some rulings that took that power away from him. So I'm just saying that as an example, right? That putting things in your kids' names may or may not be the way to go. Then you have a situation where, let's say you have, like the examples I gave here today, you've got two kids and not just one. Well, is one kid going to spin through things and, not share with the other, or however it's going to be, that could be problematic because you lose power and control over your assets if you simply just transfer them to someone else's name, as opposed to doing it through a trust document where you can specify how you want the money allocated. You can specify how you want those assets to be allocated and handled. So that's what's important to know. So again, and this underscores the last caller, you don't want to try to do crisis planning. That's what we call it when you wait until you need to go in a nursing home and you say, oh, now I got to transfer all these assets. Well, it's too late at that point because of that 5-year look back. So these are things that are important. There's so much more. But we'll take it a week at a time and we'll talk through these things and entertain the callers. Thank you all so much for listening today to Money Talks with Attorney Coral, sponsored by Columbia Savings and Loan. And as I told you, don't sleep on Columbia. Get over there and get your application in for a home loan. 414-374-0486 or stop in at 2020 West Fond du Lac Avenue. Thank you so much and look forward to speaking to you again next week.
You're listening to WNOV 860 and